From an historical perspective in this regard, Jimmy Johnson takes over the helm. Jerry Jones goes to him and says, what do we need to do to win? And Michael Irvin reportedly highlighted all the dudes in the locker room who needed to go. Get them the hell out of here because they ain't about winning. Michael, the playmaker, Irvin, did that. That was what ultimately spark-plugged the Cowboys to supremacy within the National Football League for those 3 titles in 4 to 5 years. We forget that. We look at Jason Garrett right now, surrounded by a plethora of players, most of which, all of which, Jerry Jones has paid and paid handsomely outside of Dak Prescott, who's still balling, Amari Cooper, who was still balling before last week's game, this past weekend's game. The reality is that Jason Garrett has known the mandate. He's known what is at stake, and we can't look at this roster from top to bottom and say that the Dallas Cowboys are not one of the top 5 most talented teams in the entire NFL. I know from an historical perspective, everything is on Jerry Jones. I know that he should have been got rid of Jason Garrett years ago, which I've said on numerous occasions. But there is no denying that this particular season, you got to be damn near bad, at the very least below average, to be messing this up the way that Jason Garrett is messing this up. Go ahead, Marcus.
I agree with Max. Let me say that. And Stephen A., I understand 100%, and I agree in some aspects with you. But this has nothing to do with Jason Garrett. We look in context of everything, right? You're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You own a Fortune 500 company, and that company goes under. They're not going to talk about the CFO. They're not going to talk about the lawyer team. They're not going to talk about the board. It's going to fall on the CEO. It's going to fall on the owner of the company. And Jerry Jones, for a few years now, because we all can agree that we thought Jason Garrett probably should have been gone a little bit earlier than what he will be this season, for all intents and purposes, let his personal relationship with Jason Garrett possibly cost him an opportunity to play in the Super Bowl. Let's just be honest about that. Like, Jason Garrett has not done a good job. This team is 6-5, obviously with a roster that should be good enough and competing in the NFC, like we're talking about the San Francisco 49ers, like we're talking about Minnesota, like we're talking about teams that'll be there in the end. The problem is Jerry Jones. And
Question,
it's not
Marcus.
a bad Go ahead, Max.
Question about coach for a second, because obviously you and I agree that it starts at the fish rots from the head down. Someone mentioned to me recently about the Giants. You know what the problem with Shermer is? There's no energy in the building. You got to start, there's just no juice. What about Garrett? Is there energy in the building? Is there juice in the building?
When I was there, Max, it was, but we were a veteran team. It was guys that could kind of take the reins from the head coach. I honestly don't know the culture. It seems okay. It seems like these guys have ultimate motivation. They brought Jason Witten back to increase and have a veteran leadership, whatever presence or whatever you may call it. But the bottom line is this. And to that point, Max, and I understand why you asked that question, they're not responding. Whatever he's doing, this team is not responding. We could talk about bad play. We could talk about players making mistakes, players getting coaches fired. But at some point, there's a turnaround process. You know who we hadn't talked about in a bad way? It's the Cleveland Browns. And obviously, we knew they had an issue. They had an easier schedule coming up. But that's the process. We talking about the Cowboys having to win their division to get in the playoffs. This team should have already possibly locked up a playoff spot. That's how good
they don't beat good
they
teams.
Should be, right? 4 losses to winning teams. Now, if you want to point to something, and I've said this 100 times, if you want to point to anything, what hasn't been done yet in order to help the Cowboys get better? For anybody that's arguing that this is not a situation where Jason Garrett is the only problem, what hasn't been done? We've already mentioned players have been paid. We've talked about the systematic changes in the offense. We've talked about defense with Christian.
So what hasn't been done,
draft
Marcus?
well.
What hasn't been done, Marcus, other than firing Jason Garrett? What hasn't been done?
That's it, Stephen A. And you
So
know
Marcus,
who calls that shot?
Jerry Jones.
Jerry Jones.
Well,
But what
listen.
happens if they lose to the Bills, Marcus? Do you actually think something
Oh,
would happen after that?
if they lose to the Bills, the hammer is coming down this week.
I think so.
Because
I
it's
think
the
so. I
inevitable.
agree with you. I
It's
agree
the
with you,
inevitable.
but here's where I think you and I are disagreeing. What I'm saying is, as we sit here today, we know coming into this season that Jason Garrett should have been replaced. We understand that. The fact that he wasn't replaced, now here we are after week 12. And as week 12 is here right now, I'm saying we've already looked at Jerry. We looked at Jerry at the beginning of the season. We looked at Jerry for the last decade. We looked at Jerry for the last 20 years. The point is that 24, I'm sorry, we've looked at Jerry Jones. I'm saying right here, right now. The last 24 years, all on Jerry. I get it. But right now, I'm sorry, we weren't talking about Jerry Jones when these brothers won their first 3 games, even though it was weak, against Miami and Washington and the New York Giants. We weren't talking about them until they started losing games to Green Bay, Minnesota, those kind of things.
But you and Max and a lot of people in this business been doing this job for a long time. And I say this all the time. We don't judge you on games you're supposed to win. You're not judged on that. We're judging the Cowboys on what we perceive their potential to be.
You didn't do it, but Damian Woody, for example, as an example, he picked the Dallas Cowboys to go to the Super Bowl. If that's your pick and those out there, right? You picked them knowing what Jerry Jones didn't do coming into the season. So now that we're here, how do we look at it right now? We had expectations for them anyway.
Real quick, you see what Gruden's doing with the Raiders? See, there's juice in the building, there's energy in the building, but
until they went against the Jets.
But to get that kind of coach, that means he's going to get the headlines. The focus will be on him. When the team wins, he'll get the credit. You ready to do that, Jerry? Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.